They built the Texas ranch with decades of sweat, but their children threw them out with the forged power of attorney. Elias and Martha lost everything: home, dignity, and life savings. What did the children want? Not the cattle, but a secret buried under the ranch worth millions in iron ore. Humiliated and with their power cut, Elias finds an old document that proves the colossal lie. Now, a skeptical lawyer and a loyal foreman are all the couple have against their own children's methodical betrayal. Will justice be served, or will the heirs' greed destroy their parents' lives and reputation? The fight to reclaim their home and honor starts now. Their empire was built with their own hands over decades, but what happened after the children discovered the will left the whole town in shock. Elias adjusted his faded Stetson hat and looked out the kitchen window. The rising sun painted the vast cattle fields a golden hue, fields that he and Martha had planted and nurtured with their own sweat under the Texas sky for decades. That land was more than property. It was life, history, hard work transformed into harvest and healthy livestock. Martha finished preparing coffee on the old gas stove, as she had done every morning since they married 40 years ago. "Coffee's ready, old man," she said with that tired yet affectionate smile. At 65, Martha maintained her usual sweetness, even with hands calloused from ranch work and hair entirely gray. Elias, a few years older, felt the weight of age in his knees, but never complained. Work was never a burden to a Texas man. The noise of expensive engines interrupted the morning peace. 3 pricey black SUVs pulled up in front of the main house, kicking up dust from the gravel road. Elias frowned. It was too early for visitors, and those cars were too expensive to belong to neighbors. "Who could it be?" Martha asked, drying her hands on her apron. The answer came as the doors opened. Ethan, the eldest son, stepped out of the first car, wearing an Armani suit, dark glasses, with that arrogant posture Elias could never understand where it came from. Behind him, Brooke, the middle child, dressed for the city, clutched a folder of documents. Finally, Caleb, the youngest, who was always different from his siblings, looked visibly awkward, but was there nonetheless.
"Morning, Dad." "Mom," Ethan spoke dryly, without a hug, without a smile. "We need to talk." Elias felt something strange in the air. That tone wasn't a son visiting his parents. It was business. "Talk. Come in. Have some coffee. Sit down, Ethan." "We won't be long," Brooke interrupted, opening the folder with a sharp rustle that broke the tranquility of the ranch. "It's about the C Ranch. We need to settle this now." Martha moved closer to her husband, instinctively sensing the danger emanating from the folder. "What about the ranch?" Ethan took off his glasses and looked directly at his parents. "You're going to have to leave here. The ranch has been sold."
"The ranch has been sold?" Elias blinked repeatedly, as if the dust kicked up by the cars had blinded him, trying to comprehend the absurdity of those words. "The ranch has been sold?" Brooks said, thrusting the papers in front of him with impatience, clad in an expensive blazer that looked out of place on the ranch. "It's all legal, all documented. You signed the power of attorney giving me full authority to negotiate." Elias took the documents with trembling hands. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be, but he could read enough to feel the ground crumble beneath his feet. The name of the C Ranch, the names of the new owners, a Dallas Development Corporation, and a signature that looked like his own. "I never signed this." "Yes, you did," Ethan insisted, adjusting his tight collar. "It's all here, notarized. Don't make a scene, Dad." "That's a lie!" Martha exploded, but the voice came out more like a cry of despair than anger. "We would never sign anything to sell our lives. Elias, tell them!" Caleb, the youngest, who had been staring at the ground, finally spoke, his voice low and tense. "Dad, Mom, you're getting old. You can't manage all this anymore. You poured everything into the land and the ranch was losing value. It's better this way for our financial security." Elias felt like he'd been punched in the chest, not because of the slight about his age, but because of the coldness of his youngest son, the one who was always more affectionate. "Better for who?" Elias asked, his voice raw with pain. "For everyone," Ethan replied, without emotion. "You'll receive a settlement to support yourselves. You can rent a small house in San Angelo."
"A small house in town?" Martha repeated, the words sounding like a foreign language. "This is our home. All three of you were born here. Your father's childhood dog and our family history are buried here." "Mom, don't be dramatic," Brooke said, rolling her eyes. "You'll be fine. We'll take care of you." From a distance. Elias looked around, saw Ray, the longtime foreman, and other workers approaching curiously, keeping a respectful distance. Everyone knew something serious was happening. "What if we don't want to leave?" Elias asked, trying to maintain a final shred of Texas dignity. Ethan smiled, but it was a cruel smile. "Dad, you don't have a choice. The sale is finalized and the money has been received. The new owners, an energy exploration company, are taking possession of the ranch next week." Martha collapsed onto a porch chair. She began to weep softly, the kind of crying that breaks the heart of anyone who witnesses it. Elias walked over to his wife and placed a hand on her shoulder, trembling. "You did this behind our backs." "We did it for your own good," Brooke repeated the empty phrase.
"For your own good, you mean? For your own good," Elias retorted, and for the first time he let his anger supplant his sadness. His voice came out rough but firm. "How much did you make on this? How much did you take to destroy our lives?" Ethan quickly looked away. "That's irrelevant, Dad. The amount is sufficient to support you." The haste with which he dismissed the question only confirmed Elias's suspicion that much more money was involved than what would be sufficient for his parents. Elias looked around, feeling humiliated that he had to argue about the value of his life in front of everyone. He saw the ranch hands slowly approaching, all with expressions of grief. Ray, the longtime foreman, who had worked for the family for over 20 years and was more like a brother, came forward and took off his hat. "Mr. Elias, if you need anything at all." Before Ray could finish, Brooke turned to the foreman with a cold authority that did not belong to her. Hey, you have nothing to do with this. Mind your own business." She snapped the papers back into the folder with a dry click. "Or better yet, his job here is finished too. The new owners are bringing their own crew. We don't need any of you anymore." Ray turned pale. 20 years of honest labor and loyalty thrown away on a sunny Texas morning. But I have a family, small children in the bunkhouse out back, and this is the only life we know," Ray pleaded, but his voice broke. "That's not our problem," Ethan said, without even looking at him. Elias saw the humiliation on Ray's face, who was always more than an employee, always a partner, a friend. He saw Lee. "You have 1 week to pack your things and leave," Brooke informed them, snapping the folder shut. "The move is permanent. 1 week to abandon 40 years of your life." Martha looked at her children as if they were strangers. 1 week to leave the place where I spent my entire life? Elias stood rooted on the porch, watching his children walk back to their cars. "Sorry," Caleb muttered, breaking rank. But it was an empty, cowardly apology, made only to relieve his own guilt, not his parents' suffering. The 3 SUVs drove off, raising the same dust they did upon arrival, but leaving behind not just 2 devastated parents, but also 2 families of ranch hands evicted and a ranch abandoned. Elias stood on the porch, feeling utterly powerless. Martha wept silently, tears soaking her apron. The first night was the worst. Elias and Martha lay in the bed they had shared for decades in the main house, but sleep wouldn't come. It was as if the whole house was mourning with them, the creaks of the woods sounding like groans of grief. The silence of the early morning hours carried the full weight of their reality.
In just a few days, they wouldn't be there anymore. The cruelty of Ethan and Brooke had been cold, but Caleb's cowardly hesitation hurt even deeper. "Elias," Martha whispered in the dark, her voice cracked, "what did we do wrong?" "We didn't do anything wrong," he replied, but doubt ached in his chest. "We raised them, gave them an education, love, and worked to give them the best. We always knew Ethan was ambitious, but I never thought he'd go this far." He squeezed his wife's hand. "We'll figure it out, Martha. We always have." But for the first time in his life, Elias didn't know how they were going to figure it out. In their late 60s, without a home, without work, and worse, without savings because everything had always been invested back into the ranch, they were truly lost. In the days on the third day, something unexpected happened. A moment of distraction amid the pain. Elias was going through an old drawer in the office, the one he used for minor documents, when he found a folder he hadn't opened in years. Inside were old papers, contracts, documents inherited from his own father. He was about to toss the folder when something caught his eye. A document yellowed by time, with old seals and stamps, that talked about natural gas exploitation rights on the property. Elias didn't fully understand Texas land law, but he could read. And what he was reading made it was still before dawn when Elias woke up to the sound of something being shut off. It was the dry clicking and humming of engines coming from outside the house. He got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake Martha, and went to the window. 2 utility trucks with unfamiliar logos were parked in the yard, and men in overalls were frantically working on the power lines and water main. "What are you doing out there?" he yelled from the window, quickly pulling on his shirt. "New owner's orders," one of the men replied curtly, without stopping the work of cutting the power and water to the main house. Elias felt his blood run cold, rushing outside, but the men were already finishing the job. The water pump supplying the house shut down. The porch lights went dark. "Wait, we still live here. You can't do this." "We have a work order here." The technician showed a paper signed by Ethan Vance, Elias's son, the party responsible for the property. Martha appeared at the door, startled. "Elias, what's happening?" "They cut our lights and water," he said, his voice shaking with anger and despair. The technicians drove away without looking back, leaving Elias and Martha in literal and figurative darkness. It was as if the children wanted to make the eviction even more humiliating and unbearable. "How can they do this to us?" Martha cried, hugging her husband. "We are their parents." Elias had no answer. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly helpless. When the sun rose, the entire neighborhood already knew what was happening. Mrs. Gable, who lived on the neighboring ranch for decades, was the first to arrive. "Elias, Martha, what is this situation? People all over San Angelo are talking," she said, bringing a thermos of hot coffee. "The boys sold the ranch," Martha managed to explain through tears. "They said we have to leave, but this can't be legal. A person can't just be thrown out of their own home like this." Mr. Davies, another longtime neighbor, arrived shortly after, offering assistance. The humiliation of having their power and water cut off by their own children was Elias's breaking point. Ray, the loyal foreman, seeing Elias's state, insisted, "Mr. Elias, those documents you found in the drawer, you need to show them to someone who understands these things, not to them." Elias had almost forgotten the yellowed folder amid the chaos. "There's a lawyer in San Angelo, Mr. Sullivan," Ray continued. "They say he's honest and helps common folk. My sister-in-law went to him once. He doesn't charge for the first consultation, at least just to look at the papers." Martha, who had been quiet, suddenly looked at her husband with a renewed determination. "Elias, we have nothing left to lose." Her phrase echoed in the silence. It was true. They had lost their home, their dignity, and their respect. All that remained was to fight. The next day, Elias and Ray drove to San Angelo in the foreman's old truck. Mr. Sullivan's office was in an old but well-maintained building on a busy street. Mr. Sullivan, a middle-aged man with gray hair.
The lawyer pointed to the oldest document bearing decades-old Texas seals. "This is a mineral lease contract your father signed. It gives the family the rights to any iron ore found on the property." Elias was confused. "Ore? I never knew about that." "Your father likely signed it without fully understanding what it was. It was common back then. But look at this other paper," Mr. Sullivan continued. "This is an updated geological report indicating a possible significant presence of iron ore on a section of your ranch. Elias, if this is correct, we are talking about millions of dollars." Elias almost fell out of his chair. And there was more. Mr. Sullivan picked up a copy of the power of attorney that Ethan had presented. The lawyer examined it with a magnifying glass, comparing the signature with other documents. After a few minutes, he looked up with a serious expression. "Elias, this power of attorney is a forgery. The signature does not match your other documents I have here. The notary stamp has irregularities. The sale is invalid. And if there truly is ore on the property, your children knew about it." The discovery was like a flash of lightning in the absolute darkness that Elias and Martha's life had become. The revelation that the power of attorney was a forgery brought a cold fury to Elias. "What can we do, counselor?" he asked, barely able to control his emotion. "We'll file a lawsuit to annul the sale," Mr. Sullivan replied, already organizing the papers. "We'll prove the power of attorney is a fake, and we'll investigate whether your children knew about the mineral rights, which is felony fraud. We can get a temporary injunction to freeze the property today." While Sullivan worked on the lawsuit, Ray and Martha searched the ranch for evidence. Martha remembered the strange visits. "Elias, Ethan had been walking the fields alone lately, sometimes with other men in suits. They didn't seem interested in the cattle." Lisa, the former ranch hand, confirmed the suspicion. "I saw them, Mrs. Martha. They had expensive cars. Ethan said they were agricultural technicians, but they were measuring things, not planting." The truth clicked into place. Mr. Sullivan, after a few hours of investigation, called Elias.
Yes, and guess who signed the request? The lawyer didn't wait for the answer. Ethan Vance, your eldest son, filed the request on behalf of a shell company he created. And the research was approved. The results came 3 months ago. Elias, your land holds one of the largest iron ore reserves in the region. "How much is that worth?" Elias asked, barely able to speak. "Conservatively, tens of millions of dollars." They knew, Elias. Brooke and Ethan planned this methodically. They knew you were rich and treated you like beggars to steal the mine from you. Elias's indignation was stronger than his pain. "Not just them, counselor," Martha added. "They withdrew money from the ranch account months ago, almost $300,000. They were funding the theft with our own money."
Elias's indignation was stronger than his pain. He couldn't believe that the betrayal by Ethan and Brooke had been so methodical. "And what about Caleb?" Elias asked, his voice cracking as he mentioned his youngest son. "Did he know everything?" Mr. Sullivan sighed. "The evidence shows he was aware of the plan, though reluctant. But he did sign some documents. They acted collectively." The web of lies thickened. Mr. Sullivan explained, "Ethan didn't just go to the development company. I ran a search and found that he sought out 3 different exploration companies, and for all of them he presented detailed maps of your property, maps he couldn't have gotten without your authorization." Martha observed, outraged, "They were investing to rob us." The lawyer continued relentlessly. He spent a significant sum hiring a private geologist for an unofficial property appraisal, and we found where the money came from, the savings account you kept for medical. The lawyer organized the legal strategy. "Now, Elias, you sue them for everything: forgery, felony fraud, embezzlement, emotional damages, and we will demand they return every cent they took from your accounts." Mr. Sullivan assured him that, with the evidence, it would be impossible for them to escape, and that he would seek the preliminary arrest of Ethan for forging public documents. The landline in the main house rang. Elias answered it. "Hello, Dad. It's Ethan." His son's voice sounded nervous. "I heard there are court people at the ranch. Dad, can we talk? Resolve this in the family?" Elias looked at Martha, the lawyer, and the home he had almost lost. He replied, his voice firm for the first time in a long time. "Ethan, we have nothing left to talk about. You made your choices." 3 weeks had passed since the judicial injunction. Elias woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. The sound of his own house functioning normally. Power and water had been reconnected. For the first time in weeks, he and Martha were sleeping in their own bed. The phone rang early. It was Mr. Sullivan, his voice energized. "Elias, put on your best shirt. Today is the day. The judge accepted all our motions. Your children will have to return everything and face serious prosecution." The big news followed. Ethan's preventive arrest was decreed last night. Elias felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Greed had led his son to jail. Sullivan arrived with forensic accountants. "We are going to do the complete survey," the lawyer explained. "You will receive compensation for emotional damages." The accountant approached. "Mr. Elias, worse than we thought. It wasn't just the $280,000 from the checking accounts. It was $460,000 in total. They tampered with investments, savings, the work of a lifetime stolen." At that moment, 2 cars arrived in front of the house. Caleb stepped out, visibly distraught and accompanied by a lawyer. Then Brooke emerged, also with a lawyer, but with her familiar cold arrogance. Caleb approached slowly. "Dad, Mom, I want to tell everything, the whole truth, and ask for forgiveness." He confessed the pressure from Ethan and his own weakness. "I did it because Ethan threatened to cut me out of the inheritance if I didn't participate. I'm weak, Mom." Martha, hurt, saw sincerity in his regret. Caleb promised to pay back the $50,000 he took by selling everything he owned. Brooke, however, remained cold and accusing. "If you hadn't been so stubborn, none of this would have happened." Elias stood up. "Brooke, you forged my signature, stole my money, and still have the nerve to say it's my fault? I understand character, something you lost along the way." As justice moved forward, Elias and Martha talked on the porch. "Martha," he said, "what do you want to do with all this money?" She smiled. "I want to use our pain to help other people who are going through what we did. Elderly people abandoned by their children, simple folk who can't defend themselves. I want to build hope." Elias smiled, proud. 6 months had passed since the judicial victory. Elias woke up to a sunny morning unlike any other. Through the bedroom window, he saw Ray and other workers returning to their jobs on the ranch, all now with proper pay and restored dignity. The ranch was running better than ever. Marta entered the room, bringing coffee and a smile. "Elias, we have to decide what to do with the settlement money." "Do you remember what we talked about on that terrible day?" Elias asked. "I want to use our pain to help other elderly people going through what we did. Turn part of the ranch into a special place for them." The idea deeply touched Elias's heart. "We want to build the golden haven of hope," Marta said, with a spark in her eyes. Weeks later, the first elderly resident arrived at the haven. It was Mr. Benedito, 70, who had been forced out of his home by his son after his wife passed away. Elias and Martha welcomed him with the same warmth they would give a relative. With every senior who arrived, dignity was restored. One night, Elias received a call he didn't expect. It was Brooke. "Dad, I wanted to talk to you. I have money, a nice apartment, but I'm unhappy." She had started volunteering at an orphanage. "Brooke," Elias said, "forgiveness is not something I give or deny. Forgiveness is something you earn. Do something good with your life. Stop thinking only of yourself." Months later, Brooke returned to the ranch, bringing children from the orphanage. "Dad, Mom," she said, hugging them with genuine forgiveness, "I discovered something. Helping others heals us inside." Ethan remained in jail, bitter, but the haven became a giant family, not by blood, but by choice, where abandoned seniors found purpose and the children, Caleb and Brooke, sought redemption. On that porch, where everything began with a cruel betrayal, Elias and Martha were certain they had built the greatest treasure possible, a legacy of love that would last forever. Want more stories like this? A new story awaits you tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel and get your daily dose of emotion.